Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Happy Thursday to you all. We are kind of in the midst of the weekend already in terms of the NFL. We got Thursday night action tonight between the New England Patriots and the New York Jets. Going to touch a little bit on that, but before we get into topics of that nature, I'm going to do a little segment where I make some comments about certain players in which I say don't be surprised if one thing over another happens. I think that's an interesting segment. I want to test it on you guys, see what you guys think about it, and then for tonight's game, I'm going to talk about some of the players in terms of fantasy implications who I feel have a lot to prove tonight in this game. Then I'm going to look at some general Week 3 prop bets. We covered Thursday Night Football's prop bets for this game, and then I'm also going to round out my positional rankings with the defenses and special teams who I think will have decent weekends. And last but not least, I'm going to switch to the realm of college football and talk about some big games coming up in week before. But before we get into any of that nice action, I do want to remind you to like, follow, and subscribe to the show in the network. It is greatly appreciated by all concerned, especially me and my fellow podcasters. Another thing which you guys have been doing a fantastic job of doing, Super Chat, Super Thanks. Ooh, I got the graphic right in front of me right now. Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features can be made available to you. They are a great way to contribute to the show. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, I would love to hear them. They are a great way to get your input out there into the show, get your opinion rather than mine almost all the time in the show as well. So make of this what you will, contribute what you will. I promise that the show will get bigger and better because of it. Without further ado, let us jump right into our first segment of the day here. And let's talk about the Don't Be Surprised segment. This is a little segment I'm kind of inspired by from ESPN. They did their own segment, so I was like, why not, make my own segment about certain outcomes that could happen in this weekend's games that we might be surprised about, but I am forewarning you with this segment about. So, without further ado, there are a couple that I really like here, and I want to present them to you right now. The first one is, don't be surprised if Lamar Jackson has more rushing yards than passing yards this weekend against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the reason I say this is because it's not necessarily fate of circumstance, right, for Lamar Jackson to have more rushing yards than passing yards. But I do believe that it will come down to the fact that I don't believe the Ravens offense believes in its offensive line's protection. We've seen it through 2 games. We especially saw it in that game against the Chiefs where Lamar certainly had to play hero ball to keep Baltimore in that game and get them to that point where they were literally a toenail away from taking that game potentially to overtime or winning it. So it will all come down to, Lamar doing what Lamar needs to do in order to win this game. And it's against the Cowboys, who are a Jekyll and Hyde team right now in the NFL. I don't necessarily know how to think about them or what to think about them right now on either side of the ball. So this is going to be a very interesting game where a certain contrast of styles could come into play, where we see Lamar running a little bit more to try and stretch the Dallas defense a little bit, and in return, I think that Dallas will want to focus on the weaknesses of this Ravens running attack, which is if they hand the ball off to Derrick Henry, because I still do not think that Derrick Henry adds much value to that backfield. I'm sorry to any Derrick Henry fantasy football owners, but it's just something I can't get beyond. He just doesn't scream Baltimore Ravens running back to me at this current moment in time. That being said, I do think the Cowboys will want to generate pressure early and often on Lamar, and that could see him scramble a little bit more than we're used to out of him this year. So I think that in terms of fantasy implications, it could pan out to where Lamar has one of those days where he's serviceable enough, 17 to 20 point score in fantasy, but just know that he's not going to be passing heavily in this game, in my humble opinion. I think that he's going to run a lot, use his out-of-structure abilities to gain yardage on the ground a little bit more often. And the next one, this one is a little bit less surprising, but it still is going to shock some of you and make you skeptical based off of the actual matchup. The Browns' defense, in my opinion, will not be the top defense. I'm not indicting the Browns' defense by any means. I do think that they will have a good week, potentially finish in at least the top 5 in terms of overall defenses. But I think that when I look at many different defenses around the NFL, there's just a lot of shock value in terms of what they bring to the table. Over the past 2 weeks, I've been shocked by a lot of defenses, and later in the show, I'm going to do a segment about all the defenses who, based off of favorable matchups, I think will be the top 5 defenses of the week. The Browns will be included in that segment, just letting you know ahead of time. But I think that when I look at certain matchups and I think about certain teams right now that are trying to get the best out of their defenses, or their defenses are the best units on the team, I'm looking at some teams that are kind of like the Browns in that their defenses are the saving grace of the team, but they're also in kind of prove-it situations where I feel like they're in games where their opponents could view this as a trap game, right? I look at, say, the Bills, the Jags, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. I look at the Texans against the Vikings. Those are all potential trap games where these scrappy defenses could rise from the ashes and really impress. And the Browns, we always know they're going to be one of the best defenses in real life and in fantasy. But this year, it's just so all over the place when it comes to how we view defenses right now. So the Browns still think they'll be top 5, but not number 1 overall. Then let's get into the backup QBs for this week, because I do believe that at the end of the day, a backup QB will finish top 15 in fantasy, whether it's Skylar Thompson, if he even starts against my Seattle Seahawks, or Malik Willis, who could be playing his last game as a Green Bay Packer, ironically going up against his former team in the Tennessee Titans. I think that there's a lot of value to these guys. I think that when you look at the systems they have around them, yes, we saw Malik Willis before and not Skylar Thompson, and we saw what Matt LaFleur was thinking in that regard in terms of his game plan and how it was more about the run game, really run heavy in that game. Josh Jacobs over 150 yards. But when I look at Skylar Thompson, right, I don't necessarily want him to perform that well as a Seahawks fan, but he does have the weapons to do it. And he can move the football even if he's not throwing it 50, 60 yards down the field like you would expect Tua to. So if McDaniel plays a dink and dunk style and he relies on the speed that he has to get yards after the catch, then Skylar Thompson can put up gaudy numbers even though he's not doing the dirty work and getting it, if you see what I'm saying. And then Malik Willis, he's just a serviceable, competent guy who you hopefully think that he's not going to turn the ball over, protects the football, and going against his former team with nothing to lose here, I think that he could have a big game. That being said, this is one of the more riskier opinions I have from my own kind of personal research here. But that being said, look at the offenses around them, look at the ways they could be used. I potentially think that these two guys have at least one good fantasy game in them. You might not want them on your team, but in a deeper league, you might want to take a shot at them or flyer on them this week. And the last one I have here, probably my most far-fetched one for this weekend, the Bears and the Colts, both Caleb Williams and Anthony Richardson will have the best fantasy performances of the week at the QB position. This is outlandish, I know, right? But I think about this matchup, and I think about where both of these teams are in terms of how they're getting these young quarterbacks involved in their squads. If you think about it, both of them are quote-unquote rookies. Obviously, Anthony Richardson is technically a second-year player, but because of the injury, he didn't get much game time last year, and Caleb, kind of thrown into the fire, expected to be one of the biggest faces of the Chicago Bears in recent memory. with all the receivers that he has at his disposal. So it's all going to be about the messiness of this game. I think that this game, if it gets messy, the potential for both of these guys to put up gaudy numbers. And by no means am I saying that this game is going to be a shootout, because there's a likelier chance of it being low scoring than both of these quarterbacks combining for fantastic fantasy performances. But it's not far-fetched to say that because both of these teams are at such weird points in their quote-unquote rebuilds, that both of these squads will want to take advantage of their weaknesses. I like the Bears' defense a lot, but its youth kind of gives me pause against teams like the Colts, who can try and exploit them deep. And so if Anthony Richardson sees a matchup he likes, be wary of that. He is such a big play potential kind of guy, but it will all stem from how this offense fits around him. And then on the Caleb side of things, you got to expect that sometime against, say, an opponent like Indy, he's going to have a big game, and he's going to put up the numbers that you expect out of him in this squad. It was not a performance to remember for him against Houston this week, but I think that with time, if he starts to believe in this offense a little bit more, starts to get connected with all his receivers, he will start to have better games. It's going to be a long process for Caleb to get to where the fans of Chicago, head coach Matt Eberflus, want him to be, but at this current juncture, I think this game, if it gets messy, there could be a lot of points to be had here. But this is just my humble opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments, because there are so many ways this weekend could go, so many intriguing storylines. And if you want my honest opinion, I don't think that any of these will come true. They're just thoughts that I had. But let me know what you think. Let me know what your opinions are in terms of bold proclamations for the week in fantasy. But coming up next, we look at Thursday Night Football yet again, this time looking at some of the biggest players with the most to prove in this matchup tonight. We'll be right back to talk about that after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed that first segment. Before we get into our second one here of the day, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show. And also, something that you guys have been doing an excellent job of, if you would like to leave any questions, comments, concerns, tips, or donations, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. They're a great way to communicate with me and interact with the show. Get your comments out there. Get your opinions out there. It's not just all about me. I want your guys' input as well, so this show can be bigger and better. But without further ado, let us get into our second segment of the day. We switch our attention back to Thursday Night Football. Tonight's game should be a good one between the New England Patriots and the New York Jets. But I wanted to do a quick segment about players that I believe have the most to prove in this matchup. I think both of these teams are not necessarily the strongest fantasy squads, but they do hold merit in terms of players who are going to have good seasons. I like the Jets roster a lot. Breece Hall, Mike Williams, eventually maybe. But I think that right now, they're far from the cohesive offense they can be. And I know they can be. On the Patriots side of things, we know what to expect, really. We expect a heavy dosage of Ramondre Stevenson and a solid defensive effort from their scrappy defense. But at the end of the day, there's going to come a time when the Patriots' offensive scheme will be called into question. And why not tonight? Why not tonight? I think the Jets feel as if they might have an advantage on the defensive side of the ball this time because their defense has not looked like what it has in recent past. So this feels like the Jets could take an opportunity to have a get-right game, but Ramondre Stevenson is just so good that I have a hard time getting past his kind of integral facets to this offense here. But without further ado, let's just jump right into what some of these big players on both of these teams have to prove. Let's start off with a guy we didn't mention in that little tirade before, Aaron Rodgers. I think the only thing he really has to prove is that A, he continues working into this Jets offense, getting up to speed, getting comfortable with everything, and B, just being a serviceable fantasy quarterback. He's not going to be an eye-popping stats guy. He's going to be someone who gets you 15 and 20 fantasy points, and just do it in an efficient manner. For example, last weekend, 176 yards to the air, 2 TDs, 15.14 fantasy points. So, like I said, he's going to be efficient, he's going to be competent, but he's not going to be fancy. And I don't know if you as fantasy managers listening to this will be comfortable with that going forward, but just know that that is what he is at this moment in time. If I were a deeper league, I would immediately say, oh, I can pick him up, put him on my bench. It's a supplementary QB. Maybe in a 2 QB league, I could be fine starting him along with someone who I know can put up better stats. At this current juncture, he's not a starter high-end QB1 anymore, or has pretended to be throughout his career. He's always kind of been this kind of guy who's a workman-like in terms of fantasy. Switching to his backfield partner, Breece Hall here. He's finally starting to find his footing a little bit. Had a decent game. 7 catches, 8 targets, 52 yards, 1 TD against the Titans this week. 62 yards on the ground, 24.4 fantasy points. And the thing with Breece Hall is that you know that eventually Aaron Rodgers will feel comfortable having him as a backfield partner. He's still going to be an X factor in this Jets offense. Yes, I am kind of not necessarily deterred by what Braylon Allen did, but it does give me pause if they're trying to get into a 2 RB system here. But I still think he's going to get the bulk of the carries. He's an effective weapon for them. Can be utilized in so many different ways in the run game, in the receiving game as well. So I'm not necessarily worried about Breece Hall, but I want to see him continue to stay the course in this offense. And in games where he might be frustrated, might be limited a little bit, I want to see him push and continue to try and get as many touches as possible, because that's the way that this Jets offense can keep building. And then Mike Williams. Let's talk about Mike. 1 catch, 19 yards in 2 games so far. Only 2.9 fantasy points in 2 games. You can say that, yeah, Aaron Rodgers has his buddies in his receiving core. He has Lazards. He has Garrett Wilson, one of the high-end wide receiver ones in this league. But my question about this whole thing is, if the Jets were confident in acquiring Mike Williams, then why aren't they utilizing him like he should have been a fascinating acquisition for Aaron Rodgers? Because I understand that Aaron Rodgers is comfortable with who he's comfortable with, but if you want this Jets offense to be clicking, then you have to incorporate a guy who we spend a lot of money on in the offseason. And Mike Williams just hasn't been that guy so far. So the concern with him is that he is going to be someone who's either going to be huge in situational football situations, or he can actually be a high-end wide receiver 2 in this system. And that's what I want to see out of him tonight. Can he continue to grow in this Jets system? Because if he doesn't, then I think it's a huge detriment to the Jets offense and how they're working up to full kind of speed here. And let's go to the Patriots side of things, because the Patriots side of things seems pretty clear-cut in their intent on the offensive side of the ball, but I still want certain players to prove to me that they can be competent at the very least in your fantasy football team. Let's start off, though, with the Patriots defense. Let's look at the Patriots defense for a little bit before we go to the offense. They've had 3 sacks so far, actually 3 sacks in the Seattle game, and they've been the main reason why they've kept on schedule in terms of how they want to win football games. They know that they might be behind the 8 ball in terms of what they can do offensively. That doesn't deter them from using their defensive prowess to try and win football games. So, at the very least, I know that the Patriots defense can pad stats, but I also want to know how to value them in fantasy, because it's all fine and dandy if you're a team that's trying to win with defense, but it's going to lead to moments where this defense will give up chunk plays, much like we saw against Seattle, that 56-yard touchdown. So, I'm not sure what to think of the Patriots defense in terms of fantasy implications, because they have good numbers in terms of the stats, but they are kind of vulnerable to getting hit for a couple of big plays. And maybe the Jets can take advantage of this if, certain offensive pieces are clicking in tonight's game. Then let's go to the offense, because we know Ramondre Stevenson is going to be the focal point of it all. At 21 carries, 81 yards, 1 touchdown against Seattle. There's 17 fantasy points. He's going to be the bell cow in this system. I think that Antonio Gibson could get some touches tonight, and I really want him to, because I think he would be an interesting kind of hidden gem in the waiver wire if he does come Tuesday morning. But at the end of the day, I think that what the Patriots have in Ramondre Stevenson is a guy who they know can wear you down for as long as he's on the field. And my only concern with that system is that A, eventually it's going to be figured out, and B, it makes him more prone to injury. So, make of Ramondre Stevenson for now what you will. He's a very valuable fantasy asset, but in the future, just know that opposing defenses will be more attuned to the Patriots scheme. It's kind of been a shock to the first 2 teams they faced in Cincinnati and Seattle, but it won't be the Jets. They now know if we stop Ramondre Stevenson, we have a very, very fantastic chance to take over this game. That brings me to the people who I know have to step up for the New England Patriots. Those are the receivers. Listen to these appalling stats here for the New England Patriots receivers. Let's start off with KJ Osborne, a guy who I actually kind of liked coming out of Minnesota. Only 5.1 fantasy points in Week 1, 1.7 in Week 2. Demario Douglas has 0 points for the entire season. 3.2 actually in Week 1. So it's kind of troubling to me that you don't have any kind of contingency plan outside of Ramondre Stevenson, because you have a serviceable enough QB in Jacoby Brissett to distribute the ball equally to your receivers. And your receivers aren't necessarily that bad. Yes, I get that Hunter Henry perhaps is your best full receiver and well-rounded receiver, so to speak, as a tight end, but I like KJ Osborne. You don't necessarily have to be a superstar tight end who's excellent in certain attributes to be a serviceable tight end, wide receiver to a football team. You just have to be serviceable to your quarterback. You just have to make yourselves available to your quarterback. You don't have to run go routes every 15 or so snaps. You just have to make yourselves available. Yes, it's going to be tough against some of the defenses you're going to be facing, but at least make this offense more multi-dimensional than it profiles to be right now, because Ramondre Stevenson is not always going to have good games. in the future anymore because teams are now on to you. So these receivers definitely do need to step up and step into these roles to help supplement Jacoby Brissett, because Jacoby Brissett, for all intents and purposes, as much as he's kind of a backup QB prototype, he's one of the most serviceable ones in the National Football League. And he has started, he has experience as a starter, and most importantly, I think Gerard Mayo actually trusts him to run this offense. That being said, he just needs the trust in his receivers in return. But looking at this game, it's not the prettiest in terms of fantasy implications, but you can certainly find players who will be serviceable to you for this one. But let me know what you think in the comments, because I think it's going to be a weird game. I think that it could go either way. I'm taking the Jets in this one personally, but let me know what you think in the comments. Coming next, we look to a more general Week 3 summation of prop bets here. We have a lot of good games to talk about, a lot of interesting player props to look at as well, but we'll be right back after this short break to talk about them. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. We come back to a comment from Shep Easy Sweet Spot. KJ is sneaky elusive. I agree. I think that KJ Osborne, once he gets more touches in this New England Patriots system, if he even does get the lion's share of targets as a wide receiver in this system, then I think he can have a breakout performance or two. But right now, I still need to see more out of the Patriots passing game to give me faith in that sentiment. But I do agree that once KJ gets going, he could be someone who could be a valuable asset to a fantasy team. Maybe as a flex player or on your bench. But let's look ahead to some of the best bets in terms of prop bets for the general Week 3 slate. We did Thursday Night Football, look some interesting prop bets for that game. So let's look at Sunday's slate of games. We have an interesting one. Let's start off actually with the return of a veteran QB. I don't think I would see this coming. Didn't have it in my 2024 NFL season start bingo card. How about Andy Dalton? Let's talk about Andy. He's going up against the Bengals in his first game back as a quote-unquote Panther starter after they benched Bryce Young. And I don't necessarily think it's the best matchup for Andy. So I'm going to take him under 224.5 passing yards at minus 145. I think this is a pretty straightforward bet. Yes, Andy Dalton, we've seen him come in certain moments in the Bryce Young era, whether it be through injury or whether it be through bad performance from Bryce Young. We've seen Andy Dalton in the system. But this year's Panthers team just feels different in a very bad, negative way. I don't like their O-line. Ika Mekwonu, their promising left tackle, has declined rather than improved throughout his career. And Andy Dalton should not feel comfortable in this Panthers setting, no matter how much of a veteran he is in this league. He's had very nice games, mind you, for Carolina in his career as a backup there. But at the end of the day, this Panthers team just has an eerie feeling to it that does not make me have much confidence in Andy Dalton rejuvenating it by any means. And a Bengals team who's going to come in pissed off about their loss to the Chiefs, a lot of anger, a lot of tension built up in this team that they just want to let out on the football field, and I think this could get ugly quickly for Carolina. And while the Bengals defense has been somewhat impressive, I don't necessarily think it's been the best. I don't think the Panthers are the right offense to exploit that at all. I think that while I appreciate the fact that Dave Canales wants to try something new and Andy Dalton kind of fits the mold of guys he's worked with like Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield who are trying to quote-unquote rejuvenate their careers, I still think that this is not the right time or game for Andy Dalton to put up any sort of gaudy stats. So under has to be the wave with Andy Dalton for this game. Let's go over to the PNW in terms of their opponents. The Seattle Seahawks will be playing the Miami Dolphins. Let's talk about Devon Achane in this game. Now, you would think that I would say you should take the over in terms of Devon Achane because of all the running that I expect Miami to do in this game because of the quarterback situation. But I think it's going to be very different. I think that Achane can be used often in this game, but he's going to be used more in a sense to catch Seattle by surprise. I think that Seattle's run D is still getting up to snuff, and the secondary is perhaps the strong suit of this defense. But I still don't think Devon Achane is the kind of player who will have much faith in over this coming weeks, even though, he's in a situation where he could get the lion's share of touches in that backfield. So I'm going to take the under here, actually, under 70.5 rush yards at minus 110. And the play here is kind of weird because this is one of those games where you kind of feel like Miami could be in it, but Seattle kind of should be foaming at the mouth here in terms of playing a team that's a little bit vulnerable right now. So, Devon Achane, while he could be an X factor, I just feel like Mike McDaniel will want to try to get the best out of whoever starts at the QB position, whether it be Skylar Thompson or Snoop Huntley. I think that, they're going to try and create what they can out of those two guys. So Devon Achane, like I said, I'm not as confident as I am in him now than I was in the midst of his breakout season last year. But he can have a chance to break out a couple big gains here and catch Seattle by surprise. We'll have to see. But let's talk about the receivers, shall we? Let's talk about one receiver in particular who kind of had a breakout game in his game against the LA Rams. His first game as a Arizona Cardinal where we really saw him shine and be the wide receiver one we know he can be, Marvin Harrison Jr. He had over 130 yards in just one quarter, 29.9 fantasy points in one quarter for that matter. And he's really starting to shine for this Arizona Cardinals team. Really going to make them very dangerous going forward, especially in the NFC West. They can be a feisty, frisky team there. This offense is really rounding into form. And if he's the focal point of it all, if him and Kyler can get their connection going even more and more and more, then I really think Marvin Harrison will be a guy you're confident in betting in terms of prop bets. Over 57.5 receiving yards is the bet for him this week, so I'm going to take it. And I'm confident that Marvin Harrison Jr. will make good on his promise as a wide receiver one for the Arizona Cardinals week in, week out. Because of the fact that now that Kyler is comfortable again, now he looks like himself. We were kind of worried about him coming back from that ACL injury, but no worries so far from the Arizona Cardinals side of things, so look for that connection to continue growing. And then, last but not least, let's talk about Stephon Diggs, because we've now seen enough out of this Houston Texans offense to the point where we think that this team can actually work. Because my main concern with a guy like Stephon Diggs coming into that young team, especially that young receiving core, was the fact that tensions could arise if things didn't go his way. But, as we've seen, he seems more comfortable than ever. So does Stroud. So does Collins. Like, Collins' production hasn't gone down the slightest, which I'm very shocked and surprised by because I was worried. I was worried for Nico Collins' production, but so far he's been doing well. Tank Dell really, hasn't had that promising a start, but I know he will continue to contribute as a receiver there. And then Stephon Diggs kind of fits like a glove as well. He's had his share of nice catches. He's been good in the red zone especially. So this weekend against the Minnesota Vikings, I'm going to say he's going to get the over against his former team, over 44.5 receiving yards. I think that connection between him and Stroud is really going to allow the Texans to really stretch this Minnesota Vikings defense, who I will talk about, though, on the flip side of things as I rank my defenses for this week. But at the end of the day, all of these kind of rankings or prop bets show you that this is the point in time where you can really start to see certain players come to life. Notice how I mentioned two players, one in Andy Dalton and one in Marvin Harrison, who are opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of their career, but have unique opportunities to really change the trajectory of their respective teams. For Andy Dalton, well, I don't have much hope for him, as this Carolina offense really does not give me faith. He still is a serviceable, competent veteran QB who has had experience playing in this system. And Dave Canales likes working with guys who have experience in the league, but just need that little rejuvenation period for them to really get back up to speed. And then with Marvin Harrison, obviously the rookie, had his kind of trials and tribulations early on in this system. We saw in the first game and the second game, it was like night and day. Kyler and him had that connection down pat from the first snap. And I think it's going to continue as weeks go on and they get more comfortable together. But then you have two guys in Devon Achane and Stephon Diggs, who I really think are two players who are unique in their abilities to help teams, but can also lead to the detriment of their teams as well. In Devon Achane's case, he's very much a kind of guy who, if he doesn't get the football, I don't necessarily see the use for him in the Miami Dolphins offense, because if he can't do more than just run with speed and get yards after the carry and yards after contact, then he's really not necessarily that talented outside of that. He can get you the explosive play, but I want to see my running backs doing it all in their offensive schemes. And I don't think Devon Achane, quote-unquote, does it all for the Miami Dolphins. But that being said, he's an interesting kind of piece for them in this period where they're trying to figure out what the quarterback situation will look like. And then Stephon Diggs, he's a blessing and a curse at the same time. He's a blessing because he has wide receiver 1 talent. He's a curse because he brings a lot of baggage with him. So far, CJ Stroud has handled it very well. And I think that, Stephon Diggs is very comfortable now in this Texans offense. And so I expect Stephon Diggs to continue putting up bigger and bigger numbers. But also, there's potential for that room to get a little bit crowded and a little bit uncomfortable if, CJ Stroud continues feeling more confident in Nico Collins' development rather than, having Stephon Diggs get more targets. So it's going to be an awkward balance there. But overall, all four of these players can be very intriguing prop bets for this weekend. But let me know what you think in the comments. These are just my picks for the weekend in terms of prop bets that I think can hit. But I want to know your opinions as well. Let me know if I was wrong in my sentiment about choosing some prop bets over others, or you like the prop bets that I gave to you guys today. But it's all up to you. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate all the comments as well. But coming up next, we are looking at my last positional ranking of the week in terms of the defense and special teams. Which defense and special teams units will stand out this week? And we'll be right back to talk about them right after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We are transitioning from our overall Week 3 prop bet segments to our final positional rankings of the weekend. We are going to be looking at some defenses that can really separate you from the pack in your fantasy football games. So without further ado, let's jump right into the segment here. Yeah. It does not seem like I have the graphic for tonight's game. Well, anyways, I'm going to do it. We don't need a graphic for this particular segment. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into who I believe will be the top defenses to look out for on the open market this week. Let's start off with an easy one, really. Mainly this one is because of the matchup that you can't ignore here. It's the Raiders. The Raiders are going against the Carolina Panthers, and the Carolina Panthers have shown us through 2 weeks that their ineptitudes really are going to show. Oh wait, did I say? Actually, I might have the matchup wrong, but whoever the Raiders are playing, if it is the Panthers, then I'm confident that they will get it done. I'm sorry for the confusion if I did say the Panthers are playing the Bengals. I was looking at the NFL schedule before, so don't quote me on that. Let me know in the comments if they are playing each other. That was my mistake. But at the end of the day, if the Raiders are playing the Panthers, then I have full confidence in them. And also because they actually are a good defensive unit. Their front seven's very exciting. Yes, there might be questions about their secondary, but when Max Crosby is in your front, as well as Christian Wilkins as one of your interior linemen, then you should be set. They had 1 interception and 2 sacks in their game against the Baltimore Ravens, which goes to show that they can do it not just against weak teams, but against far superior teams. And the Raiders going forward can be a team that, if their offense can play complementary football and Gardner Minshew takes care of the football most importantly, then this defense will just get even more sneakily better for you in terms of fantasy implications. They already put up the stats. You already know that the players in that system are some of the best in the football league. And you're also kind of banking on the Raiders playing in a way that's very physical and very gritty. I love Antonio Pierce's attitude in terms of helping football teams. At the end of the day, it's all about complementing each other. I worry about the Raiders only because that defense might get a little bit tired if this offense also gets tired. And we're going to have to monitor their progress week in, week out. But this matchup should be an easy one for them. I'm sorry if there was any mix-up about who the Bengals were playing, who the Panthers were playing, and ultimately who the Raiders are playing. But they're an interesting, good defense for this matchup. And then, I was talking about the Browns earlier as not being one of the top defenses. Well, I still have them in my top 5. They're going up against a Giants squad that really has lacked the big play. It's really not looking like Daniel Jones is the answer. They have the talent, but it's just not translating to on-field success. This could be the game where Brian Dable is officially on the hot seat if he wasn't already after that Commanders loss, where they didn't even allow a touchdown, still lost. So I think, yes, my prediction might ring true in that the Browns actually have a down game, but I still have huge faith in this defense. You all know how good from top to bottom the Cleveland Browns defense is. I don't have to tell you any names outside of, Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward in the secondary. It's just a very well-balanced defense, and they're going up against a Giants team that might not have many answers for it. So make of that what you will. I still think that the Browns defense might run out of gas if the Browns offense, much like the Raiders offense, does not continue to play complementary football. And actually, in a way, I'm more concerned about the Browns offense than the Raiders offense because Deshaun Watson, in a funny way, has not played better than Gardner Minshew to start the season. Who thought I would be saying that? But it's all dependent on how Jim Schwartz and this Browns defense continues to be physical and use their talent to overwhelm opposing offenses. They should have a fun time of it against the Giants at the very least, even if somehow, some way, their offense isn't up to par in this game. But then let's go to the more sneakier defenses of the league. And let's talk about a defense that's kind of been underrated, not necessarily talked about enough, because of the fact their offense has been very inept in terms of how they play. And that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars, if we think about it, based off of the points they've given up, have been one of the best defenses in the NFL by all means necessary. They don't necessarily have the big stars of, say, the Raiders and Browns defenses. But against Miami and that high-powered offense with Tua in it, mind you, they held them to 70 points, kept them in the game, did their job. That was on the offense that loss. I can't necessarily say that loss was on the Jacksonville defense. They did a fantastic job. Yes, they allowed that one long touchdown to Tyreek Hill, but that was it. That was the only big play of that game for Miami. And then against the Browns, held them to 18 points. Yes, it's the Browns offense. We don't know what that entity is. We don't know if it will be good. That stands for something. Then in back-to-back games against teams that are expected to contend in the AFC, the Jags defense kept them in it. Again, there's a similar storyline here. All of these defenses have something in common. Their offenses are not necessarily the best. They're not necessarily offenses meant to play complementary football, and we don't know that many answers about them just yet. That being said, if the Jags defense can show up against the Bills, I still think they're going to lose, but it will show that at least one of their sides of football can keep them in football games. Whereas the Raiders and Browns, I kind of expect them to continue, being what they are, which is for the Raiders, complementary, for the Browns, an amalgamation of different things. So the Jags are the team that really need their defense to continue doing this, keeping them on schedule. So I'm not necessarily as confident as I am in, the matchup as I am with the Browns and the Raiders, because I know they're facing inept offenses. But there's something to be said that the Jacksonville Jaguars defense stood toe-to-toe with Miami's offense and only held them to 20 points. So the Bills obviously are a team that are really turning a new page in terms of how their offense looks. They look really potent under Joe Brady. James Cook looks like one of the best running backs in the league. But the Jacksonville Jaguars defense could be sneaky good. They could get a couple takeaways, and I wouldn't be surprised. So keep an eye out for them, even though they might not win many football games. And another more opportunistic defense that I know probably will not be relying as much on its offense to win games, the Vikings. Especially this game, as their schedule definitely gets tougher and tougher as the season goes on. They're facing Houston, but I think the reason why the Vikings defense has been one of the most underrated in the league is because of all these kind of hard-nosed players that really bring different mentalities to this team. I love the addition of Andrew Van Ginkel in this offseason. Ivan Pace is one of the most underrated front seven players in the entire NFL. They have a secondary with guys like Metellus, combined with guys like Smith, who's a veteran, who can really get the job done there. And at the end of the day, they probably had the most impressive defensive performance of the season. Holding, yes, obviously a very limited San Fran offense with the loss of both McCaffrey and Samuel. But I can't say that I can look over that performance and look at the Texans and say, oh, the Texans will just blow them away. Because the Texans, as much as I love their receiving core, I think that Bears game was very telling as to how C.J. Stroud can be defended. Because a lot of teams had trouble last year, especially, trying to defend C.J. Stroud with all the weapons he had and all the ways he could break you apart. And I think what I love about this Vikings defense and what Brian Flores has done with it is that each and every single player can play and wear many different hats in this system. Andrew Van Ginkel can be a hard-nosed linebacker, leading the team in tackles, but could also get a vital pick six. Harrison Smith may not be the best player in this defense anymore, but can still be an emotional, vocal leader. And That's the difference between, a defense that has to help its team and a defense that can help its team but doesn't necessarily have to try too hard to do it. Doesn't necessarily have to tire itself out to do it. They keep on schedule. They get takeaways. They create opportunities for their offenses. And at the end of the day, they can believe in themselves going toe-to-toe against far superior offenses. And so, the reason why I wanted to do these rankings in a way that showed love to the actually fantastic defenses we expect to be at the top of these rankings, and also look at more defenses that are proving that they have a force to them, I really think that it just goes to show that defenses are at the peak of their powers in terms of fantasy implications here. Because, yes, you can play the matchup game like I did by choosing both the Raiders and Browns, but you can also look at different performances around the league and go, well, say that a team is a team that doesn't necessarily have the best offense, and their defense is on the field more often, and they're actually getting takeaways and trying to create advantages for their offense, and that gives you hope that eventually these teams will feel confident, not just their defensive prowess, but most importantly, the opportunities they can create. Because defense right now is all about takeaways, especially in fantasy. So, looking at teams like the Jags and the Vikings on defense, I think that they're very opportunistic, and you can go, why not take a flyer on them? I would feel very comfortable in them if I were to have them in certain situations against certain teams, and they're proving that they can match up toe-to-toe with anyone on the defensive side of the ball at the very least. Let me know what you think in the comments, because this debate is very intriguing. Let me know what you think about my defenses. Let me know if you would take one defense off, put one defense in, and which defense it would be. But coming up to finish off today's show, we switch back to the world of college football for just a brief moment and look at some of the big games and some of the big bets there that I believe can hit. You definitely don't want to miss it for our final segment of the day on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our final segment of the day, I would like to take a little bit of a respite from NFL talk and switch to the world of college football, looking ahead to Week 4. A lot of intriguing conference matchups. Yes, we are getting into conference play here, getting into the weeds of the college football season, as I like to call them. A lot of intriguing games, especially for teams playing each other for the first time in these different conferences. As conference realignment has changed the landscape of college football, we're now getting matchups that we never thought could happen again, and they're all intriguing. So without further ado, let's look at some of the best college football games for Week 4, starting off with a West Coast trip. USC, Michigan. USC 2.5 point favorites. The money line is minus 137. Michigan's plus 112. And here's the thing about this game. it's definitely lost a lot of luster. Now, if you look at the Michigan side of things, right? If you look at all the turmoil that has happened with this program, the turnover that's happened with this program, you're thinking that there's not much hope left from that championship season last year. But they still have a lot of talent. It's just that they don't know how to use it, at least on the offensive side of the ball. They still have Donovan Edwards. They still have Khalil Mullings. They still have Colston Loveland, who's an all-world tight end right now in college football. And it's just that the offensive production hasn't been there because they haven't had a solid QB to rely upon. Well, they believe they found him because they switched from Davis Warren to who everyone thought would presumptively start the season, Alex Orji. Now, what I like about Alex Orji is that he is one of those players who has kind of been kept a secret to the college football world. He's played a couple snaps in the Jason McCarthy era where he's just running the football. He's played a couple snaps this season where he's running the football as well. But you haven't really seen him take command of this offense fully. And so that's going to be the intriguing storyline for Michigan in this game. If Alex Orji is the answer, what's this game plan going to look like for the Wolverines? Then I transition to the USC Trojans. And they look very, very impressive through 2 weeks here. They got a very good win against LSU. They got a shutout against Utah State. And they're playing some of the best football in the Lincoln Riley. But it might not even be Lincoln Riley's doing. I really like the hire that he made, letting go of Alex Grinch and all the relationship they had there from their time at Oklahoma together, brings in a UCLA guy in DeAnton Lynn, and this defense looks rejuvenated. They've incorporated many transfers, many holdovers, and this defense is looking potent. But I do want to also focus on the offensive side of the ball, because there's been a lot of hype around Miller Moss as potentially a QB that could go within the first 5 picks of the 2025 NFL Draft. I say slow your roll on that, but what I've been impressed with for Miller Moss has been his ability to have poise and composure in the pocket. I look to his drive against LSU, that 2-minute drill against LSU, leading USC down the field, comfortable in the pocket, really kept that team on schedule in that situation, ultimately getting that big win to start off the year. And as the home team, they should feel comfortable, right? But the thing that could, cause them some trouble is the fact that Alex Orji has many different traits, and you don't necessarily know how he's going to use them in this offense. Sharon Moore might have done this to kind of send a shockwave through the USC Trojans' minds, but it's all going to depend on Alex Orji himself and his play in this game, because you can call the plays for a guy who you believe can be the answer for you at Michigan, but he just has to execute them very well. So that being said, I'm taking Michigan here. I think they're going to cover the spread comfortably. I think this is going to be a 2-score game. I'm taking USC 27, Michigan 13. I just don't know how Alex Orji is going to look, because I don't necessarily have enough information about him to feel comfortable saying he can lead a full start for this team. But USC definitely looks very impressive at home with a revamped defense, with Miller Moss looking comfortable in the system. I like USC. But let's look at a Big 12 conference game, because the Big 12 is looking like one of the best conferences to follow in all of college football right now. And this game is going to be an interesting one because there's a lot of different storylines here. Well, with Cam Rising's health and Ollie Gordon's slow start to the season, we're going to talk about it a little bit more tomorrow as well. Utah versus Oklahoma State. Utah favored by 1.5. Their money line plus 108. OK State's minus 130. And the story of this game is that these are two of the biggest contenders for the Big 12 title. But they do have some question marks, and big ones at that, surrounding what can happen to them in the future, especially in the long term for Utah, because let's start off with them. I like Utah a lot, and I really hope for their sake they're in the debate to go to the Big 12 championship and ultimately the college football playoff. But I can't get past the fact that Cam Rising's health has always been an issue for this team, and this time I'm not sure they have enough surrounding their backup, who's now Isaac Wilson, to really supplement him for as long as Cam Rising might be out. I'm not as concerned about his hand injury as I was about his injury last year or many years before, but it is something to monitor because now that we're in the thick of conference play, they're going to have to get some nice wins in conference, especially against an OK State team that believes in itself and that believes that they can get Ollie Gordon II going again in this game. But if it's Isaac Wilson starting and not Cam Rising, then I have a lot of trepidation for how this game is going to go for Utah. Looking at Oklahoma State, I think that even though they haven't gotten Ollie Gordon going as much as they've wanted to, Alan Bowman's been a pleasant surprise. And not for nothing, even though he's one of the most experienced QBs in college football right now, he hasn't been the most impressive, right? He's been around the Big 12 a lot, bumped around many different teams, finally finds its home at OK State in his 7th year playing college football. And I appreciate, that he's been able to weather the storm, but there's going to come a time where he's just not going to be up to snuff. I can't overlook the fact that last season he almost had as many touchdowns as almost as many interceptions as touchdowns thrown. And in this Oklahoma State setup, I do think that Ollie Gordon is still king. I think that he will find his footing again. And in this game especially, I do feel like they want to take advantage of situations where Utah might be getting a little bit behind the 8 ball, especially if, Isaac Wilson can't keep that offense on schedule. So look for this to be a close game. Look for it to be a very important game right down to the end. But I am going to take Utah in this one. And the reason why I'm taking them is that I just believe in their defense a little bit more than OK State's. I believe that Utah has built to this point they can handle the Cam Rising injury on both sides of the football. Isaac Wilson, yeah, he wasn't that impressive, but he was competent, didn't turn the ball over that often in that game against Utah State. So, as long as Utah can stay ahead of schedule on both sides of the ball, I think they should be fine. I think that they're going to cover just barely. 24-21 will be my final. Now let's look at another new conference game. Tennessee, Oklahoma. Tennessee, 7.5-point favorites. Minus 162 in their money line. OU is plus 134. And this game really is intriguing. Josh Heupel facing his former team in terms of where he came from. Oklahoma assistant, obviously. And this game should have some very interesting storylines in terms of how both these teams are building to start the year. In Tennessee, they have the new quarterback in Nico Iamaleava. Looked very impressive through 2 games. Really against Kent State, even though he didn't play that much because of that blowout score, which was very ridiculous in my opinion. I think that, just getting him involved, utilizing this offense to the best of its abilities, I really like what Tennessee has shown me thus far. Whereas Oklahoma, you can say they've been impressive in terms of getting to be undefeated at this point because they could have lost those games, though. I think that Jackson Arnold really is working his way into the system, doesn't necessarily look comfortable, unlike what Nico has shown us early on. And the defense, yes, they've been very good. I like this Oklahoma defense a hell of a lot, but I do think that they can't necessarily put it all together. They haven't shown cohesion in both units thus far. So that's the reason why I think Tennessee should feel like a heavy favorite. They played well on both sides of the ball. Their defense is one of the best in the country. And Josh Heupel has these boys flying up and down the field. I like Tennessee potentially in a bit of a quote-unquote blowout here. I think that Tennessee can run Oklahoma off the field. I think that Oklahoma simply isn't ready at this current moment in time for conference play. If this game would have happened, let's say 2 or 3 weeks on the road, then maybe they would be ready for it. But it feels like they're getting thrown into the fire here way too early, Oklahoma. So it could be a bloodbath for them. I'm taking Tennessee 37-20 in this one. And then the last game, NC State, Clemson. Look, neither of these teams are where they want to be at this point in the season. I think that Clemson, has shocked their system in that first game against Georgia. They had a nice bounce back against Appalachian State. But at the end of the day, they really aren't the same Clemson as we talked about when they were in their little dynasty period in the early to mid 2010s. And then NC State kind of lost a little bit of its luster in terms of its top 25 pedigree, but they still are a dangerous team. I like Grayson McCall, obviously been around as well, been at Coastal for a long time, coming over to NC State. He's one of the more experienced QBs in college football. I like the receiving core, but it's going to come down to, whether I believe that Cade Klubnik has more performances like the one against Appalachian State in him. I think he has a couple in him left. He's going to have them, especially. They're 11.5-point favorites, and they're minus 165 in the money line. So I'd say that they can potentially win this game and win it big. I'm going to take them, say, 20-10 in this game. I don't think it's going to be high scoring. I think there's going to be a very weird ACC game. But overall, let me know what you think in the comments, because all 4 of these games, very exciting, indicative of conference realignment, and they could go either way. But let me know what you think in the comments, whether I got it right or wrong in terms of college football. But that will just about do it for the show. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your comments as well. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you for tuning in yet again. Please consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show on the network is greatly appreciated. Keep on using the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features. Make yourselves available to them as always to grow the show, interact with the show even more. But thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow to close out the week on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, same time as always. I've been Chris Shepard. Thank you all yet again.